Would you stay calm if you knew the next military move could pull an entire region into a wider war overnight? What if the biggest danger is not the strike everyone saw coming, but the phase that starts after it? And before we go deeper, do one quick thing for me. Like this video, subscribe if you want clear updates without the fog, and share it with one person who follows world events but hates empty hype. Because that is where this story really begins. Not with one explosion, not with one headline, and not even with one speech from one leader. It begins with a feeling spreading through military command rooms, foreign ministries, oil markets, and ordinary homes across the Middle East. The feeling that something has shifted. The feeling that the old red lines no longer mean what they used to mean. And the feeling that the next phase may already be underway before most people even realize it. When people hear a title like this, they imagine panic as pure emotion. They picture fear. They picture rushed meetings. They picture officials shouting into phones while maps glow on giant screens. But real panic at the state level looks different. It is colder than that. It looks like emergency military briefings at odd hours. It looks like commanders moving missile units without making public announcements. It looks like air defenses staying awake longer than usual. It looks like oil traders watching one narrow waterway with the focus of surgeons. It looks like diplomats using careful language in public while sounding much more urgent in private. That is why this moment matters. The issue is not only whether strikes happen. The deeper issue is whether the United States is preparing to move from limited response into a more deliberate, more sustained phase of pressure. And if that is happening, then Tehran is not just dealing with a single military problem. It is dealing with a strategic problem that touches its security, its economy, its regional allies, and its image at home. To understand why nerves are so high, we need to pull back for a second. Conflicts like this do not explode from nowhere. They build through layers. First comes warning, then retaliation, then counter-retaliation, then the point where both sides still claim they do not want a wider war, even while taking actions that make a wider war more likely. That is the dangerous zone. That is where miscalculation grows. And that is where history tends to move faster than leaders expect. For Iran, the fear is not just American firepower. Everyone already knows the United States has overwhelming military reach. That part is obvious. The real fear is uncertainty. Iranian planners can survive known pressure better than unknown pressure. If they know a strike is symbolic, they can manage it. If they know a response is limited, they can absorb it. But if they believe Washington is shaping the battlefield for a broader campaign, then every radar site, missile depot, command post, naval asset, and proxy network suddenly looks vulnerable. And this is where the phrase next phase becomes so important. It suggests a transition. It suggests that what happened before was only preparation. It suggests the earlier actions were meant to test defenses, gather patterns, send warnings, and create choices. In military language, the next phase is usually the phase that matters most. It is the stage where intent becomes clearer, the stage where signaling turns into action, the stage where a government must decide whether it is trying to punish, deter, degrade, or fundamentally reshape the opponent's behavior. From Tehran's point of view, that distinction is everything. If the United States only wants to send a message, Iran can still claim endurance. It can tell its public that the storm will pass. It can lean on nationalism. It can absorb pain and wait for political divisions in Washington or among American allies. But if the United States is preparing a campaign designed to reduce Iran's military reach across the region, then the pressure becomes harder to manage. Because that kind of campaign is not about one night. It is about tempo. It is about repetition. It is about turning every day into a question mark. Think about how powerful that uncertainty is. A commander can handle danger more easily than ambiguity. A government can explain sacrifice more easily than confusion. But when nobody knows whether the next strike will hit a port, an airbase, a proxy route, a surveillance hub, or a command network, then the burden multiplies. Every possible target becomes a source of pressure. Every delay feels dangerous. Every silence from Washington feels suspicious. This is one reason the psychological side of war matters so much. Modern conflicts are fought in the sky and at sea, but also in the mind. If one side can convince the other that escalation is always one step away, it gains leverage without always needing to fire the next shot immediately. Anxiety becomes a weapon. Timing becomes a weapon. Even restraint becomes a weapon if it makes the other side guess what comes next. And yet, this is not simply a story about weapons and military maps. It is also about pride. States do not just respond to danger. They respond to humiliation. When a government feels exposed, especially in front of its own public and its own security elite, it becomes more likely to take risks. Not because those risks are wise, but because backing down can look even more dangerous. Leaders fear weakness almost as much as they fear attack, sometimes more. That is especially true for systems built on the image of resistance. Iran has long presented itself as a power that cannot be easily intimidated. It has invested years into a narrative of endurance, strategic patience, and regional influence. If that image is cracked too visibly, the damage is not only military, it is political. It touches internal legitimacy. It affects how allies see Tehran. It affects how enemies test it. And it affects how ordinary citizens judge the cost of confrontation. Now imagine the pressure from inside the system. Military commanders want readiness. Political hardliners want resolve. Economic officials fear sanctions, disruptions, and market shocks. Ordinary families fear instability and rising prices. Regional partners want reassurance. Militias aligned with Tehran want direction. Each group pulls on the state in a different way. That is how panic becomes structural. It is not one emotion. It is many pressures colliding at the same time. This is why U.S. troop movements matter so much, even before any major announcement is made. Troop preparation is never just about numbers. It is about posture. Where units go matters. What kind of units move matters. Which support assets follow them matters. Air defense, surveillance, refueling, electronic warfare, naval cover, logistics chains, and intelligence coordination all tell a story. Sometimes that story says caution. Sometimes it says deterrence. Sometimes it says preparation for something larger. And once that impression spreads, every capital in the region starts reading the same signals. Israel watches, Gulf states watch, Iraq watches, Syria watches, energy markets watch, shipping companies watch, insurance firms watch, diplomats watch, even countries trying to stay neutral watch. Because if the next phase becomes real, nobody near the region gets to pretend it is someone else's problem. Now, what exactly could the next phase mean? There are several possibilities, and each one creates a different kind of fear in Tehran. The first is a broader suppression campaign against Iranian military infrastructure tied to missile launches, drone storage, surveillance, and command coordination. The second is a sustained effort to weaken Iran's ability to threaten shipping in and around the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The third is a coordinated push against the networks Iran relies on across the region, including routes, depots, advisors, and allied armed groups. And the fourth, the most dangerous of all, is a phase that combines all three until Iran is forced to choose between escalation and strategic retreat. None of those options would require a full-scale invasion to be devastating. That is an important point. People often hear escalation and assume it means columns of tanks and massive occupation plans. But in today's environment, a state can be placed under enormous strain without anything resembling a classic invasion. Precision strikes, maritime pressure, cyber disruption, intelligence, targeting, financial pressure, and coordinated regional operations can produce a level of stress that feels just as severe, especially if it lasts for weeks. For Iran, this kind of pressure is hard because its strategy depends on depth. It depends on having many tools, many routes, and many layers. It relies on the belief that even if one part is hit, another part can respond. It relies on geography, proxies, missile deterrence, and political patience. But if Washington is trying to reduce those layers at the same time, then the strength of the system can start to look like a burden. The wider the network, the more there is to defend. Quick pause here. If this breakdown is helping you see the bigger picture, tap like, subscribe for more sharp analysis, and share this video with someone who wants facts before opinions. And then there is the economic dimension. You do not need every facility to be destroyed for the economy to feel fear. You only need enough instability to shake confidence. Traders hate uncertainty. Investors hate unpredictability. Businesses hate disruptions they cannot model. If leaders in Tehran believe the next phase will keep military pressure high while also raising the risk around energy routes and trade flows, they must think far beyond the battlefield. They must think about inflation, shortages, public frustration, and elite disagreement. That is where the human story comes back in. Strategic talk can sound cold, but behind every military calculation is an ordinary population forced to live with the consequences. Families wonder if prices will jump again. Parents wonder if sons will be pulled into deeper service. Businesses wonder if imports will slow. Students wonder if the less stable by the month. War anxiety spreads long before bombs land nearby. Sometimes that anxiety becomes a second battlefield of its own. This is why narrative control matters so much to Tehran right now. The government must appear strong enough to deter enemies, calm enough to avoid looking shaken, and confident enough to reassure supporters. But that is a hard balance to maintain if American preparation continues. Too much bravado can satisfy. Too much caution can look like weakness. Too much silence can invite panic. Every message becomes a test. The United States understands this. Military preparation is not only about capability, it is also communication. A deployment sends a message. A public statement sends a message. Silence sends a message. Even vague phrases about protecting interests or preserving freedom of navigation can be heard very differently in Tehran than in Washington. That is the thing about high-tension crises. Words are never only words. They are signals, and signals can be misread. That is where escalation becomes most dangerous, not when both sides fully understand each other, but when both sides think they understand each other and are wrong. Iran may assume the United States is bluffing. The United States may assume Iran will act rationally under pressure. Both assumptions could fail at the same time. That is how crises jump tracks. That is how the next phase can arrive, not because one side planned every step, but because both sides backed themselves into it. But endurance becomes harder when uncertainty enters military planning. If the next phase includes repeated blows to the infrastructure that supports Iran's deterrent image, then survival alone may not be enough. The system would also need to prove relevance. It would need to show it can still impose costs, still shape events, still matter. And that pressure to prove relevance is exactly what raises the risk of a dramatic response. That is what the outside world should worry about most. Panic does not always produce retreat. Sometimes it produces overreaction. A cornered actor may lash out, not because it expects to win, but because it believes doing nothing is even worse. In that sense, the most dangerous moment is often not the first strike. It is the moment after a state begins to fear that the next phase will keep reducing its options. So what options does Tehran actually have? It can signal restraint and try to reopen diplomatic space. It can retaliate indirectly through partners. It can threaten maritime disruption. It can intensify missile and drone signaling. It can focus on internal control and ride out the storm. Or it can gamble on a bolder move meant to shock Washington into caution. Every one of those choices carries risk. Restraint risks humiliation. Indirect retaliation risks broader retaliation. Maritime threats risk global backlash. A bold move risks inviting the very campaign Tehran fears. And still, leaders may feel they have to choose something. Because once the image of an approaching next phase takes hold, passivity itself becomes a decision. That is what makes this moment so unstable. The fear is what Iran might do because of what it thinks the United States is about to do. There is also the regional map to consider. The Gulf is not just a military arena. It is a system of arteries. Energy flows through it. Trade flows through it. Military partnerships depend on it. The closer tensions move toward that system, the more the whole world starts paying attention. A conflict can feel local until shipping, fuel prices, and insurance costs remind everyone that local geography can have global consequences. That is why the Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of so many discussions. It is narrow, exposed, symbolic, and economically vital. Iran has long treated it as leverage. The United States and its partners treat it as a line that must stay open. If the next phase is partly about denying Tehran the ability to use that waterway as a pressure point, then we are not looking at a short emotional reaction. We are looking at a strategic contest over leverage itself. At the same time, diplomacy never fully disappears. Even when leaders speak harshly, back channels often stay alive. That is the strange rhythm of modern crises. Publicly, both sides sound unbending. Privately, both sides test limits, send warnings, and search for exits. The tragedy is that private caution and public pride do not always line up. A government can be more careful behind closed doors than it appears on television, and still drift into escalation because it cannot be seen yielding. So where does that leave U.S. troops in this picture? Their role is bigger than many headlines suggest. Troops are not just there to fight. Their presence shapes the entire political meaning of escalation. If forces are repositioned, reinforced, or placed under higher alert, it tells allies that Washington is serious. It tells adversaries that the cost of miscalculation may rise fast. It tells everyone in between that the United States wants to control the next chapter instead of simply reacting to it. But troop preparation also creates its own dangers. The more visible the preparation, the more it can be interpreted as intent. Tehran may see readiness as a warning. It may also see readiness as confirmation that a broader campaign is coming. And once that belief hardens, every defensive move on one side can look offensive to the other. That is one of the oldest traps in conflict. Security for one side can feel like threat to the other. This is why language matters so much in moments like this. A phrase as simple as next phase can echo through intelligence assessments and newsrooms alike. It sounds procedural, almost calm, but inside that calm, wording can sit an enormous message. We are not done. We are organizing. We are deciding what comes after the warning. For a government already under pressure, that is enough to raise the temperature by itself. Now step inside the Iranian decision-making world for a moment. Imagine being a planner who must prepare for the worst without fully knowing what the worst is. Do you disperse assets and risk looking defensive? Do you centralize control and risk presenting a clearer target? Do you activate allies and risk wider retaliation? Do you wait and risk losing initiative? There is no painless option. And that is exactly why the situation feels so combustible. Add domestic politics to that equation, and it gets even harder. Hardline voices inside Iran do not disappear during crisis. They get louder. They argue that resolve is the only language America respects. They warn that hesitation invites more pressure. They frame compromise as surrender. Even if leaders privately want room to maneuver, they must consider the internal cost of looking weak. External pressure and internal pressure start feeding each other. The United States has its own internal dynamics too. If American personnel are seen as threatened, pressure for a stronger response grows. If the public is told that regional stability, shipping security, and force protection are all at stake, decision makers can find themselves boxed in as well. That is what makes these confrontations so difficult. Neither side is operating in a vacuum. Both are speaking to their publics, their militaries, their allies, and their critics at the same time. That brings us back to the emotional center of this story. Why does Iran panic at the thought of the next phase? Because the next phase threatens to remove control. It threatens to turn a managed confrontation into a moving target. It threatens to expose the difference between rhetorical strength and operational resilience. It threatens to show whether the networks Iran built over decades can still absorb sustained modern pressure. Before we go to the final stretch, support the channel in your own style. Save this video, send it to one thoughtful friend, and subscribe if you want more calm analysis when the headlines get loud. This is where the role of proxies and regional partners becomes so significant. Iran has never relied on one single front. It built influence through layers of relationships and aligned groups across multiple countries. That gave Tehran options. It also gave Tehran plausible distance from direct confrontation. But if the next phase includes a strategy to squeeze those networks more aggressively, Iran could face a painful dilemma: use the network more openly and invite more punishment, or hold it back and look constrained. Neither option is attractive, and that is why we should not assume panic means collapse. Panic can exist inside a system that is still capable of dangerous action. In fact, cable systems under pressure can become more dangerous precisely because they still have tools. The risk comes when leaders feel those tools may become less effective with time. That creates an incentive to act before the window closes. So the real question is not whether Tehran is nervous. Of course it is. The real question is what kind of nervous it is. Is it cautious nervous, looking for exits? Is it defiant nervous, preparing to absorb more strikes? Is it desperate nervous, ready to gamble? Those are very different states of mind, and each one points toward a different future. Watch the signals carefully. Watch military repositioning. Watch whether attacks stay limited or widen geographically. Watch whether official language becomes more precise or more emotional. Watch whether regional states start speaking with greater urgency. Watch whether shipping concerns begin dominating economic headlines. Often, the first clue that a crisis is changing comes not from one dramatic announcement, but from many small signals lining up at once. And above all, watch for the difference between theater and structure. Leaders perform strength all the time. That alone tells you little. What matters is whether the structure of the conflict is changing. Are the targets changing? Is the tempo changing? Are support assets moving? Are allies coordinating more tightly? Is economic language shifting from concern to contingency? When those structural signs appear together, the next phase may no longer be hypothetical. That is the cliff edge here. Once both sides believe the structure is changing, they stop reacting to the present and start reacting to the future they fear. And people do reckless things when they are fighting not just what is happening, but what they think is about to happen. So what happens next? The honest answer is that several roads remain open and none are comfortable. One road leads to controlled pressure. The United States keeps building military leverage. Iran avoids a dramatic direct response, and both sides stay just below the line of a major regional war while quietly testing diplomatic exits. That road is tense, dangerous, and exhausting, but it is still a road. Another road leads to a cycle of symbolic retaliation. Each side acts just enough to prove resolve, but not enough to force the other into all-out escalation. That sounds manageable on paper. In reality, it is fragile. Symbolic actions have a way of producing real casualties. Real casualties have a way of destroying carefully built limits. That road looks stable until it suddenly isn't. A third road leads to strategic overreach. One side misreads the other. A strike lands harder than expected. A proxy action spirals. A maritime incident shocks global markets. A red line assumed to be flexible turns out not to be flexible at all. Suddenly, leaders are no longer choosing from calm options. They are reacting under pressure, with pride, fear, and anger doing more work than strategy. And then there is the darkest road. The next phase becomes exactly what Tehran fears: a sustained campaign that steadily chips away at its ability to deter, signal, and project influence. If that happens, Iran may conclude that a bigger gamble is the only way to reset the board. That kind of logic is what turns bad crises into historic ones. This is why viewers should resist simple narratives. It is easy to reduce a story like this to heroes and villains, or to assume one side is fully in control while the other is simply reacting. Real crises are messier. States posture, leaders improvise, military signal, markets tremble, citizens absorb the cost. Everyone claims confidence. Almost nobody feels it. And beneath all this public language sits a brutal truth. Once a confrontation becomes about credibility, compromise gets harder. Not impossible, but harder. Because every compromise can be portrayed as weakness. Every pause can be portrayed as fear. Every quiet diplomatic move can be attacked by hardliners as surrender. That is the prison of escalation. Leaders can see the danger and still keep walking toward it. So if Iran truly is panicking, that panic is not just about incoming pressure. It is about shrinking room, shrinking military room, shrinking political room, shrinking narrative room. The state may still have weapons, allies, and options. But if it feels time, uncertainty, and exposure closing in together, panic becomes rational from its point of view. And if Washington believes that panic creates leverage, it may keep pushing, not necessarily toward war for war's sake, but toward a strategic outcome. Greater deterrence, reduced regional threat, safer shipping lanes, stronger allied confidence. Yet every push carries its own danger. A pressured rival may calculate badly. An anxious rival may strike for effect. A proud rival may prefer risk to embarrassment. That is why the next phase matters more than the last headline. Headlines tell you what happened. Phases tell you what kind of conflict you're in. Are we in a warning phase, a punishment phase, a degradation phase, a containment phase? The answer changes how every move should be read. Right now, the strongest signal is not certainty. It is preparation. And preparation has a strange power. It can prevent war by making the cost too clear. It can also accelerate war by making the other side believe the decision has already been made. That paradox sits at the heart of this whole story. Some viewers may ask, could this all still cool down? Yes, absolutely. States have stepped back from dangerous edges before. Back channels matter. Shared fear matters. Economic pressure can encourage caution. Regional partners may push for restraint. Even leaders who sound fierce in public can decide privately that enough is enough. But cooling down requires something rare. Both sides must believe they can step back without looking broken. That is the challenge. Can Washington claim deterrence without demanding total submission? Can Tehran claim resilience without forcing a dramatic response? Can both sides create a pause that does not look like surrender to their own supporters? If the answer is yes, then the region may avoid the worst. If the answer is no, then the next phase may come not as one giant moment, but as a series of actions that slowly remove all the exits. And that is what should stay with you after this video. Panic at the state level is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, organized, and hidden behind formal language. Sometimes it looks like precision. Sometimes it looks like caution. Sometimes it looks like defiance. But underneath, it is the same thing. A system under strain, trying to keep control while sensing that control may be slipping. If U.S. troops are truly preparing for the next phase, then Iran is not just watching. It is measuring, guessing, repositioning, and worrying about what kind of future is arriving. Not next year, not someday, but now. And if that future is a sustained contest over deterrence, regional power, and the right to shape the Gulf, then this is not a passing flare-up. It is the kind of turning point that can redefine the balance of fear for years. That is why this story matters. Not because panic makes a dramatic headline, but because panic inside a pressured state can change the choices leaders make. And when those leaders command missiles, proxies, naval forces, and national pride, even one bad choice can light up the entire map. So the question is no longer whether the world is watching. The question is whether the people making these decisions still have enough room, enough discipline, and enough realism to stop the next phase from becoming something much worse. Because once that phase truly begins, nobody in the region gets to stay untouched. And by then, the cost will not be measured only in strategy, headlines, or speeches. It will be measured in fear, fire, and the lives caught between them.